done? What came over me? Who am I? It was wonderful. I loved every minute of it.
Goldie Hawn has been one of America's most beloved actresses for more than 50 years. Known for her bright smile, infectious laugh, and warm personality, she became Hollywood's golden girl who could light up any screen. But like all stars, even the brightest ones cast shadows. Behind her cheerful public image, Goldie quietly kept track of those who treated her poorly during her long career. Throughout her decades in Hollywood, Goldie encountered several male actors and industry figures who mistook her kindness for weakness. Some were co-stars who became difficult once the cameras stopped rolling. Others tried to charm her and became vindictive when she didn't respond as they hoped. A few dismissed her as nothing more than a pretty face, only to be surprised when she proved them wrong by walking away from projects and leaving them scrambling. For years, Goldie kept these stories to herself, choosing professionalism over public drama. But now, at 79, she's become more open about her experiences. She doesn't need to name names directly because those who were there remember the tension and difficult moments that occurred behind the scenes. The comedy legend who turned toxic. When Foul Play hit theaters in 1978, audiences loved the chemistry between Goldie Hawn and Chevy Chase. The movie was a hit, and their on-screen partnership seemed effortless and fun. But what viewers didn't see was the chaos happening behind the cameras during filming. According to people who worked on the set, Chevy's behavior off-screen was far from charming. He was unpredictable and moody, constantly creating problems for director Colin Higgins. He would improvise lines without warning, refuse to do takes he didn't like, and throw entire scenes into confusion just because he felt like it. Chevy's ego, which was already well known from his time on Saturday Night Live, became even more inflated during the movie's production. When the cameras stopped rolling, he would snap at crew members for interrupting what he called his rhythm. He would sulk when Goldie got laughs from the cast and crew, and he insisted on having the final say in almost every creative decision. What looked smooth and natural on screen was actually a slow-motion disaster behind the scenes. Goldie, ever the professional, tried her best to keep things positive. She made jokes, tried to boost everyone's morale, and did her best to smooth over Chevy's frequent tantrums. But the problems kept getting worse. One crew member overheard Goldie whisper to a stylist, "He's not funny when the cameras stop rolling. He's just cruel." This wasn't an exaggeration. Crew members later recalled how Chevy would go on rants about how he was carrying the entire movie. He would sneer at Goldie's lines and once even refused to shoot a scene until it was completely rewritten to give him what he considered better material. He wasn't improvising to make the story better. He was sabotaging scenes to feed his own ego and make himself feel more important. The tension on set reached a breaking point during the final weeks of shooting. By then, Goldie and Chevy were barely speaking to each other unless they absolutely had to for a scene. Chevy, known for his smug attitude and cutting sarcasm, reportedly made degrading comments about Goldie's comedic abilities. This was particularly insulting since she had already been one of Hollywood's most successful and beloved stars for nearly a decade. "She's lucky to be in my orbit," he allegedly told a producer, showing just how little respect he had for her accomplishments. His contempt wasn't subtle. It showed in every look, every sigh, and every undermining joke he made at her expense. Goldie didn't respond publicly or play the victim, but those close to her said she was quietly devastated by the experience. She told friends that she had never felt more disrespected by a co-star. One assistant claimed that Goldie began asking to rehearse alone just so she could avoid being around Chevy's toxic energy. What should have been a fun comedy project turned into an emotional endurance test. Crew members found themselves walking on eggshells and quietly choosing sides. The atmosphere on set became tense, joyless, and exhausting. Everyone just wanted to make it to the wrap party without screaming, one makeup artist remembered. Meanwhile, Chevy seemed either completely unaware of the problems he was causing or actually pleased by them. His habit of dominating scenes and putting others down had earned him a bad reputation even before Foul Play, but this project really cemented it. Crew members who had initially admired him quickly changed their minds. "He wasn't a genius," one lighting technician said later. "He was a bully with good timing." Another crew member added that he treated the set like it was his personal kingdom, and everyone else like they were his servants. Despite the film's commercial success, Goldie refused to even consider doing sequels or working with Chevy again. Studios pushed hard, offering money, prestige, and even Oscar-worthy roles, but she wouldn't even return their phone calls. "Not interested," was the only message she gave her agent. That silence said everything, and she meant it. To this day, there are no warm interviews between them, no nostalgic photos, and no friendly reunions. Just a deep, permanent rift. Goldie put Chevy on her personal blacklist, and he never got off it. The seducer who became a saboteur. The second man on Goldie's list had a different approach. He wasn't trying to ruin a film. He was trying to seduce her. In the 1970s, Warren Beatty wasn't just a movie star. He was a force in Hollywood. He was charismatic, cunning, and constantly involved in scandals. He was as famous for his romantic conquests as he was for his box office success. Warren didn't just date women. He pursued them like they were trophies to be won. At one point, he set his sights on Goldie Hawn. At first, she was flattered. Who wouldn't be? Warren had enormous influence in Hollywood, and that kind of clout could open many doors for an actress. He invited her to lunch, then dinner, then to exclusive parties where his compliments were a little too smooth, and his hands lingered just a little too long. Goldie played it cool, remaining polite but unmoved. She knew the game he was playing and had no intention of becoming just another footnote in Warren Beatty's long list of romantic conquests. She had watched other actresses fall under his spell, only to be discarded like yesterday's news when he got bored. So she turned him down gracefully, repeatedly. That's when his charm began to crack and show something uglier underneath. Warren wasn't used to rejection, especially not from someone he considered beneath him in Hollywood's hierarchy. He liked his women compliant and his power unchallenged. When Goldie continued to refuse his advances, insiders say he started taking cheap shots behind closed doors. Directors began hearing whispers that Goldie was unreliable, too focused on comedy, and not serious enough for important dramatic work. He would laugh dismissively when her name came up in meetings, make cutting jokes masked as playful banter, and roll his eyes if someone mentioned her work or accomplishments. It was a familiar pattern in Hollywood. If Warren couldn't have a woman, he would try to undermine her career instead. And it worked, quietly but effectively. Doors that had been open to Goldie began to close. Meetings were suddenly canceled. Scripts she had been promised mysteriously vanished. Invitations to the kinds of industry events that really mattered stopped coming. Warren didn't sabotage her career with one dramatic action. He did it the Hollywood way, through suggestion, doubt, and carefully planted negative comments in the right ears. One producer recalled being warned that Goldie wasn't a safe choice for a prestigious role because she supposedly had too much baggage. The only baggage, of course, was Warren's bruised ego. Goldie saw exactly what was happening. "I don't mix business with power plays," she told one reporter when asked if she would ever work with Warren. That was as much as she ever said publicly about the situation. Privately, though, she was more direct. A former assistant remembered her muttering, "He doesn't handle rejection well, he punishes it instead." And punish it he did, professionally, surgically, and without ever getting his hands dirty in an obvious way. Goldie never lashed out in interviews or fed gossip to the press, but the people closest to her knew the truth. Warren's name became poison to her, mentioned only with groans and sidelong glances. When studio executives would float his name for possible co-starring roles, she would cut them off with just a look. "That's not happening," she would say flatly. There was no anger in it, just certainty, like she was talking about a locked door and had thrown away the key, one friend recalled. She didn't just close that chapter of her life, she burned the entire book. Years later, at a glittering awards show, Warren tried to play the old charm card one more time. He approached her with a smile, acting like nothing had ever happened between them. Goldie smiled right back, cool, elegant, and controlled, then turned on her heel and walked away without saying a word. A journalist standing nearby caught the whole interaction and later muttered, "That smile could freeze hell." It was clear that whatever damage Warren had done to their relationship, it was as permanent and irreversible. The method actor's humiliation. The third man on Goldie's blacklist didn't try to charm her or whisper behind her back. Instead, he tried to humiliate her right there in front of an entire casting room filled with industry professionals. The room was quiet, containing just a handful of producers, a casting director, and two of Hollywood's biggest stars reading lines across from each other. Goldie Hawn had been invited to audition for a prestigious drama, a rare and deliberate departure from her usual comedic roles. She came prepared, grounded, and ready to prove that her acting range extended far beyond comedy. Dustin Hoffman was already attached to the project. At first, it felt electric having two heavyweight performers in the same space, but the moment they began reading their lines together, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. Hoffman, known for his intense method acting style and unpredictable temperament, suddenly stopped the scene cold. "You're not connecting," he said flatly, interrupting Goldie in the middle of her line. The room immediately became tense. Then, with a smirk, he turned to the producers and added, "She's still playing it like a sitcom." Goldie froze. The producers chuckled. Some nervously, others not so much. They weren't sure if this was part of some acting exercise or method. It wasn't. It was humiliation delivered with surgical precision. Hoffman hadn't come to collaborate or help create something beautiful. He had come to belittle a fellow professional. What should have been a standard audition reading turned into something more like a public dissection, with Goldie as the unwilling subject. She powered through the rest of the reading with her eyes focused and her voice steady, but something fundamental had shifted inside her. It wasn't just embarrassment she was feeling, it was betrayal. She knew this. A difference between tough, honest direction and ego-driven sabotage designed to make someone feel small. This wasn't about improving the performance or serving the story. This was about dominance, about one actor asserting power over another in the most public and demeaning way possible. Goldie walked out of that room not just disappointed about losing a potential role, but completely done with that kind of treatment. The next day, she dropped out of the project without any hesitation. Insiders say she told her agent, "I won't fight to be taken seriously by men who have already decided I'm just a punchline." She refused multiple offers to reconcile or to audition with a different male actor. She made it crystal clear that she would never work with Dustin Hoffman again, and she didn't need to make any formal statements about it. Her absence from the project said more than any press release ever could. The industry pretended not to notice the drama, but everyone who had been in that casting room knew exactly what had happened. Hoffman hadn't exposed some flaw in Goldie's acting. He had exposed something ugly in himself. It wasn't constructive criticism, it was a power play disguised as artistic feedback. It wasn't method acting, it was method abuse. For Goldie, the incident wasn't about a bruised ego or losing out on a role. It was about dignity and respect. Years later, she told an interviewer, "In this business, some men forget they're not directing the women around them." Those who knew her well had no doubt who that comment was aimed at. Privately, she admitted that the moment haunted her, not because she lost the role, but because for a split second she had begun to question her own instincts and abilities. For someone like Goldie, who had built her career on confidence and self-assurance, that was the deeper betrayal. Hoffman didn't just try to dominate a scene. He tried to cut her down at the root. He didn't see a peer sitting across from him. He saw someone he would knock off balance for sport. He treated the audition like it was his personal stage, and Goldie like she was just a prop in his one-man show. A close friend recalled that Goldie went home that night and wrote in her journal for the first time in years. "He tried to shrink me," she wrote. "I won't let him." And she didn't. She never went back to that corner of the industry on anyone else's terms. Instead, she carved out her own path, her own pace, and her own definition of success. She proved that you didn't need to abandon comedy to be powerful. You just had to own whatever you chose to do. When asked later if she would pursue another dramatic leading role, she would flash her signature smile and say, "If the room's right." It was her way of saying everything while revealing almost nothing. The wild card, who crossed the line. The fourth name on Goldie's list caught her completely off guard and made her rethink her approach to comedy altogether. Bill Murray showed up an hour late to the first table read with no apology and no explanation. He made a loud entrance, cracked a snide joke at someone's expense, and used his half-finished coffee cup as a coaster on top of the script pages. Bill Murray was in early discussions to co-star with Goldie Hawn in a late 1980s comedy, a quirky studio project tailored to showcase his improvisational charm. On paper, it looked like a dream pairing. Goldie was America's sweetheart, and Bill was comedy's unpredictable wild card. But within minutes of that first meeting, Goldie knew something was seriously wrong. As the reading began, Murray did what he was infamous for. He went completely off script. He mocked the dialogue, undercut dramatic beats, and turned serious scenes into opportunities for cheap laughs. He made faces, rolled his eyes, and acted like the script was a personal insult to his comedic genius. The writer sat in stunned silence as he rewrote entire sections on the spot, making their carefully crafted work feel completely disposable. At first, Goldie tried to keep things light, playing along with a forced smile. She had worked with improvisers before, but this felt different, more aggressive and disrespectful. Then, right in the middle of a line, Murray turned to her and said with a smirk, "Why don't you try acting like you've actually done drama before?" Laughter broke out across the room from the kind of men who mistook cruelty for comedy. Goldie didn't laugh. She closed her script, stood up during the next break, and quietly left the room. She didn't throw a fit, demand rewrites, or even raise her voice. But the next day, her team called the producers to say she was out of the project. There was no press release, no gossip leak, just a clear, unflinching exit. Rumors swirled about what had happened. One insider claimed she told a friend, "He thinks unpredictability is genius. I think it's just exhausting." Another source said she warned her representatives to steer clear of any future projects with comedians who confuse disrespect with spontaneity. It wasn't about one bad joke. It was about recognizing a whole culture of so-called brilliant men who weaponized their charisma and called it art. These men would bulldoze scenes, hijack attention, and leave their female co-stars to clean up the emotional wreckage afterward. There was never any moment of reconciliation or friendly interview years later. Goldie never brought Murray up in conversations and never looked back. Studio executives pushed for them to work together more than once. After all, she was still highly bankable, and he was still being called an icon. But her response was always the same: no interest. She didn't slam the door. She removed the entire house from her map. That particular set became her breaking point. Goldie didn't just walk away from that one film. She began turning down an entire category of roles. No more Buddy. Comedies built around difficult men. No more scenes where she had to smile while being overshadowed or ridiculed. She was done with the charm, the "he's just being Bill" excuses, and the behind-the-scenes apologies that always came too late. She started saying no more often, and not gently or apologetically either. When asked in an interview why she passed on so many male-led comedies in the late 1980s and early 1990s, she smiled that knowing smile and said simply, "I chose peace." For Goldie, peace meant never having to babysit another overgrown man-child on a movie set again. The activist's public dismissal, if Bill Murray was a chaotic storm of ego and impulse, the next man in Goldie's orbit was something colder, more calculated and cutting, and it all went down at a charity dinner she would never forget. It was supposed to be a feel-good night, a high-profile charity gala in Malibu filled with celebrities, industry powerhouses, and cameras flashing from every corner. Goldie Hawn had been invited to give a short speech on mental health and mindfulness, a topic deeply personal to her. She wasn't there to sell a brand or promote a film. She spent days writing something sincere and heartfelt. It wasn't self-promotion. It was genuine advocacy for causes she believed in. But before she even reached the stage, Sean Penn, seated just a few tables away, was already making a spectacle. He rolled his eyes, sighed dramatically, and shifted in his seat like a bored teenager. Multiple guests later confirmed hearing him mutter under his breath, "Another celebrity wellness sermon." A few people chuckled. Most didn't know how to react. Those who respected Goldie stayed quiet, feeling uncomfortable. The others followed Penn's lead, pretending his sarcasm was somehow witty. After her speech, which was gentle, vulnerable, and met with warm applause from most of the audience, Penn leaned back in his chair. Loud enough for several tables to hear, he scoffed, "She should stick to giggling." Goldie didn't flinch visibly. She raised her glass, smiled like nothing had happened, and slipped out early. But those closest to her knew she was furious, not with performative anger, but with something deeper. It was disgust wrapped in remarkable restraint. Her anger wasn't because her ego was bruised, but because something she genuinely believed in, something she had shared with sincere intention, had been casually dismissed by a man who thought his brand of cynicism was somehow more valuable than her hope. Penn had built his entire image around tortured rebellion, and apparently couldn't understand that vulnerability might be a different kind of strength. In the car ride home, one source said she cried, not out of hurt, but from deep, bone-tired frustration. "My whole career," she reportedly said, "and I'm still reduced to giggles by men who don't know what the hell I stand for." That night, she drew a new boundary. No interviews involving Sean Penn, no joint appearances, no polite air kisses across crowded rooms. When asked about him later, she gave a practiced smile and a short answer. "Not my energy." Privately, she was more pointed. "You can believe in activism," she told friends, "without stomping on someone else's purpose." Penn had always been intense, almost aggressively so. His volatility was constant tabloid fodder, his rage nearly performative. Directors called it passion. Goldie saw something else entirely, cruelty disguised as conviction. With Goldie, it hit differently. It wasn't a feud or even a personal conflict. They were never close enough for that. It was a dismissal, plain and public, and it left a crack in her faith that she never bothered to repair. After that night, she became extremely selective about the spaces she occupied and the events she attended. She had been gracious for decades, but now she demanded more respect, more thoughtfulness, more basic human decency. No more rooms filled with men who thrived on diminishing others just to feel larger themselves. When their paths did cross again at award shows or mutual friends' parties, she didn't play the polite Hollywood game. She kept her distance, met his glances with blank civility, and left early every single time. The legend's condescension. The final name on Goldie's list was different from all the others. He wasn't a co-star, a peer, or even a direct rival. He was a Hollywood legend, a so-called gentleman from the Golden Age, and he made her question whether old-school respect had ever really applied to women like her. Goldie Hawn had always honored legacy and tradition. She understood what it meant to step into rooms built by giants, to work beneath the golden glow of names that had shaped Hollywood's history. Few names loomed larger than Kirk Douglas. But reverence isn't the same thing as admiration, and behind the curtain, Goldie felt the full weight of what those legends too often represented. She never publicly criticized him, that simply wasn't her style, but those close to her say, Douglas left her feeling deeply unsettled. It wasn't because of something obviously offensive, but because of how effortlessly he made her feel small, ornamental, and completely dismissible, despite all her accomplishments. At industry events, Douglas would greet her with exaggerated old-world charm, hand kisses, drawn-out winks, and comments about her appearance wrapped in velvet condescension. To some observers, it looked like nostalgic gallantry from a bygone era. To Goldie, it was suffocating and demeaning. "He talks to me like I'm still the blonde in a bikini scene," she reportedly told a friend, "and I've won an Oscar." There was no single dramatic insult, no explosive confrontation. It was quieter than that, more insidious and persistent. There were the constant interruptions during industry panels, the way her professional insights were brushed aside in serious discussions, and the introductions that called other people visionary, while she was simply the beautiful Miss Hawn. She once confided to someone, "You can be number one on the call sheet and still feel like nothing more than decoration." It wasn't about deliberate malice. It was about how deeply certain men had been conditioned to equate a woman's presence, primarily with her physical attractiveness and little else. That kind of dismissal doesn't leave obvious bruises, but it leaves echoes that can last for years. Goldie heard those echoes long after the conversations ended. While she maintained warm professional relationships with his son Michael Douglas, whom she praised for his generosity and modern perspective, Kirk remained to her a relic. He was a reminder of a Hollywood that never bothered to see past her smile. No matter how many scripts she rewrote, no matter how much creative control she fought for and earned, and no matter how much she proved her intelligence and business acumen. One producer recalled her walking out of a roundtable discussion after Douglas interrupted her for the third time in 5 minutes. "I've said what I need to say," she reportedly announced before calmly exiting the room. To this day, Goldie rarely brings him up in conversations, not because of fear or diplomatic concerns, but because, in her own words, some men don't deserve a second act in your memory. The iron behind the gold. If there's one thing Hollywood consistently underestimated about Goldie Hawn, it was her memory. Behind the laughter, the disarming spontaneity, and the golden aura that made her a beloved household name was something else entirely. Iron will, sharpened by decades of being doubted, minimized, and mocked, always while being expected to smile graciously. She remembered every joke that wasn't really a joke, every eye roll disguised as professional feedback, and every moment she was dismissed before she even had a chance to speak. Her sunny public persona never wavered, but privately, she kept careful track of those who had shown their true colors. The men on her list learned, sometimes too late, that mistaking kindness for weakness was a costly error. Goldie's response was never loud or dramatic. It was simply final. She didn't need to make public statements or engage in feuds. She just quietly, permanently closed those doors. Her career continued to flourish because she learned to choose her battles wisely and her collaborators even more carefully. She proved that sometimes the most powerful response isn't confrontation. It's the simple, dignified act of walking away and never looking back.